Hey, good afternoon and welcome to today's 3-hour session of COPDI. As advertised, this is going to be 3 one-hour segments, so what we do need folks to do who are looking to get COPDI credit, that would be our certified chief officers, to make sure that you sign in and out at the beginning of each episode and at the end of each episode that you're going to watch. So we're excited to do some scenarios today. We have 3 scenarios. One is the propane explosion that occurred in Laytonsville, and the other is the Twinbrook water rescues. And if you followed any of our boss talk and our challenges in the streets, it wasn't really planned this way, but it kind of worked out this way, right? We talked about specialty team stuff. We had talked about the swift water capabilities in the SITs, and then we had the Twinbrook event. And we talked to the first arriving company officers about their actions. And then today is the opportunity to hear from the incident commander. And that's going to be the same with the propane explosion as well. We did have to change the last hour, and the last hour is going to be some scenario-based, talking about some photos and videos, and you'll see how that goes. So again, sign in and out for each episode. Make sure you put your name and your fire service ID. Also, in the last hour, hour number 3, we're going to tinker a little bit with Zoom. So just bear with us. Those folks are going to hang in for the last hour. We're going to run YouTube Live and Zoom, see how that works out. One of the things we're looking at trying to do. All right, so first up is going to be Chief Goldstein. He was the incident commander on the Laytonsville propane explosion. We're going to talk about all the stuff that happened there from the incident commander perspective and so forth. I think that's all I got. Chief Goldstein, it's you.
Well, thank you very much, Mark, and great to be here. Clearly, the opportunity to talk about and use these building blocks. John Emmons' role and his presentation the other day about TRT, the folks about swift water rescue, followed by Twinbrook Parkway. These incidents, building fire with explosion, with entrapment, definitely has a lot of complexities, and want to highlight great work done by everybody involved that day, and take the opportunity here through the case study. Talk about the objectives. You've seen those before. What we're going to talk about: the area itself, the fire, the building, the explosion, fire, the command structure, operations, and lessons learned. So we're going to go ahead and jump into a second to play the 7 Alpha 2 dispatch audio so that we have that.
Units to operate on 7 Alpha 4, 23,601 Laytonsville Road, Cross Street, Rocky Road. Building fire with entrapment. Box area 17-2. Units to operate on 7 Alpha 4, 23,601 Laytonsville Road, Cross Street, Rocky Road. Building fire with entrapment. Engine company 1328. Howard County Rescue Engine 4, 3448. Truck 734, Tower 740. Rescue Squad 717. Tanker 717. Tanker 713. Tanker 704. Ambulance 717. Battalion 705. Battalion 703. Operations on 7 Alpha 4. Non-hydrogen box 17-2.
All right, so as you heard that dispatch, you had non-hydrogen circumstance, Laytonsville. First due engine company, engine tanker 717, is not on the incident. They were on a medical local when this call was dispatched. It involves mutual aid, so Howard County 4-4. Lisbon is a part of the first due box alarm on this, and we're in a non-hydrogen area. The lesson learned document has been out and goes into a little more depth about this. one unique feature when we do play this next audio segment that I want to point out, and we'll jump back to the slides. So the area itself, this is Rupert Landscaping. This is just north or west of Laytonsville proper. This is an aerial overview. The house itself, that's original farmhouse in the middle lower part of the screen, that is a 1870s residence, Register of Historic Places, called the Allnut House. It is then and now surrounded by a multiple building complex of the large landscaping company that's a multiple state organization. So again, that building dates back 1870s. There was a side Charlie addition that dated back in the early 2000s. That addition is pertinent as this incident goes on. The structure itself is used for human resources and IT functions of the landscaping business. There are two Charlie exposures that slide shows, and we'll jump back on that slide just for a second. Those two Charlie exposures are long two-story buildings. They're used for both regional and Montgomery County specific operations, but the complex is broad. Now, the building itself is served by underground propane supply, and we'll talk about where those shutoffs are, but there are two underground propane tanks, very close proximity to the Allnut House. How this incident developed is roughly 7 o'clock in the morning, the facilities manager for Rupert arrives on site, comes into the Allnut House, and smells gas. So we're talking about propane here. Naturally, propane has different gas properties than natural gas. He immediately recognizes that there's a situation in the structure and gets the HR, or excuse me, more technically, he gets the IT staff that was already on site out of the building. He sends a company-wide email out to Rupert's management telling all of those coming to work not to go into the Allnut House and stay away. He contacts their utility provider, a propane company, and requests their assistance. At 7 a.m. Roughly 7:30 in the morning, the propane provider representative is on site. They do a face-to-face. They start doing an assessment. And at the time of the explosion, the Rupert representative, the facilities coordinator, is inside the structure. The gas company representative is on the outside of the structure and was in the process of turning the tanks off and preparing to set up a pressure gauge to start determining the line testing of these circumstances. So that is the building, and now we're going to jump to a little bit of the 7 Alpha 4 audio because things have changed from the original pre-alert.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, sounds good.
Oh, punt with that. Yeah, it's okay. The call is dispatched on Alpha 2 as a rural building fire with entrapment. Right after the Alpha 2 dispatch occurs, in the very beginning Alpha 4 transmission, it's advising that multiple calls are being received for a building fire with explosion and entrapment. This plays a role that we'll highlight further on into the incident. ECC identifies that they're getting the multiple calls. dealing with a building fire with explosion and entrapment, and they initiate the Water Supply Task Force and the Rapid Intervention Dispatch. Going down the road, responding units recognize that this street address deals with the entire building complex, and as such, knowing what circumstance, what their target is as it relates to positioning as well as water supply, that's questioned by Engine 728. That does go back and gets updated to the old farmhouse as definition, which is the all-night house. So that tells the units responding that it's sitting on the front of that property, right adjacent to Laytonsville Road, Route 108. Unique circumstance here. Rupert has an extraordinarily large underground cistern on site. So while we have a water supply dispatch, or the rural house fire dispatch on the way with 3 tankers, and the water supply task force started, we do have a static water source on site that is available. Earlier I highlighted that that engine tanker 717 was on a current medical local as this call is dispatched. They come up on Alpha 4, identify that they're available, and ask Battalion 5's coordination for response. Battalion 5 acknowledges yes and adds them on to the incident. Rescue Squad 717 checks up responding, identifies that they're going with 2 personnel as their firefighter is bringing tanker 717. Also plays a very critical role in the incident as it turns out. The rescue squad arrives on the scene, identifies large 2-story single family with a significant collapse and explosion and light smoke showing. Prior to the squads arriving, county police, let me rephrase that. Prior to the squads arriving, ECC provided an update that there was now a confirmed 1 trapped. As this call started, I was at Station 28, saw the call pop up on the pending screen, following Engine 728 up the road. Right after I got in the car, switched my police radio to A5, listening to see what other information. And it very early on, there's a police unit on the scene providing information and provides that confirmation that there is a significant explosion and that he is confirming, the police officer is confirming that there is 1 trapped in this structure. That's relayed to the responding apparatus. Rescue squad goes on the scene, again confirms explosion and collapse and light smoke showing, then confirms that there is 1 trapped and no active fire. About that time is when Engine 713 arrives on the scene, and I arrive on the scene right after Engine 713. So let's take a look at the property itself, the building, to get an understanding of what we're faced with. This is the Bravo side of the structure, so that wing or overhang, that's a breezeway between the all-nut house and exposure Charlie structure, as you see from the center of that screen towards the left. This is the Bravo Charlie corner of the structure that we're looking at. And we'll jump back to this picture also in a second. Let's look at Delta. This is side Delta of the structure. Again, you see vast amount of damage throughout the structure. Very, very at the bottom, there's a fire extinguisher in the screen just below that fire line tape. And just to the right of that, there are 2 underground propane tanks. One's for the all-nut house, one's for the Charlie exposure. This is the location where the utility provider's worker was standing when the explosion occurred. Quick look inside the front door. Again, this house is 1870s by structure. This is the stability circumstance that you see. Totally destroyed, survivability profile, risk-benefit calculations that you're looking at, and how do you address a search or a activity inside the structure. Jumping back a second to the first picture here, side Charlie. When Captain Yingling, Squad 17's officer, comes on the scene, he's directed to this back corner. As you see at the top of this, what is the side Charlie addition, you see the entire roof structure is pulling away from the original house. You can actually see on site that morning, you could see the original small dormer that was built for the original house that they then overlaid this larger dormer, which is the side Charlie addition. So everything from the middle of that picture to the left towards the breezeway is all a part of the side Charlie addition. Of note, building construction. That's new 2000 era lightweight construction, frame, 2x4s, and I-joist. Everything else in this structure is 1870s era construction. Heavy timber and full dimensional lumber. So when the rescue squad arrives on the scene, this is a focused view of just that side Charlie addition. This is much later into the incident. There's been some delayering that has occurred. This is where our victim was. So we have the full wall of that Charlie wall, as you see, has blown off of what would be base described as a knee wall and is now dropped down to the ground. That's what's supporting the second story component of that side Charlie addition. Originally, during the incident, those two party doors or those two cellar access doors were closed. But inside, and this next picture gives you a view of that inside after extrication, on top of this area of the floor is where the patient was ultimately located at, and debris, explosion components were moved off of him, and this is the operation. So crews originally accessed were sitting on that ledge where you can see the joist hangers off to the screen right. That's originally the old house prior to the addition. And in this area is where our victim was at. Very complex incident. Originally, light smoke showing. Confirmed to later be no active fire. As we'll talk about, we did have a little smoldering fire circumstance to deal with, but the light smoke best attributed to dust, the remnants of the explosion by far. So arriving on the scene, I was quite pleased to see the structure from approach to not have any active fire, not have any active fire circumstances. Clearly the building demonstrated to me significant explosion damage and structural integrity issue, and what was the root cause of the explosion, and what about additional leaks and secondary explosion circumstances. Rescue Squad 717 had already identified that they needed a soak basket, that they needed additional resources on site, and that they had a patient and that they were engaging in an extrication circumstance. We had a large gaggle of staff members. At one point it was identified to be roughly 15, standing around the side delta component of the house. We also had house fire with tankers, water supply task force, rapid intervention dispatch, and I'll talk about it. By this time, we already had the requested dispatch of a technical rescue assignment inbound. Laytonsville Road, Route 108 in this area is a 2-lane road. We definitely had limited access, as well as we were going to be creating a bottleneck and chock-a-block for the structure and arriving apparatus. Quick look as to the command structure. When I arrived, Battalion 5 arrived right thereafter. One of the first things I asked Chief Lancaster to do was go get a first-hand look of the structure. Tell me what we were dealing with and what was our priorities and concerns at hand. As that was ongoing, shortly thereafter, Chief Mann arrived, Battalion 3 arrived and joined me in the buggy. So it was Chief Mann and myself in the car. safety officer, Captain Neal. I assigned Rescue Squad 717 as the extrication group himself. I ascended that Tower 40 was additional manpower for the rescue squad. Engine 713 had arrived just before me. As I was first arriving, I saw them pulling a crosslay, knew they had a protection capability in place, and I assigned them to the protection activities. Engine Tanker 717, should be a P there, it was Paramedic Engine Tanker 717. They arrived and I assigned the engine tanker officer EMS. And shortly thereafter, I assigned Engine 734 as the staging officer, for EMS staging. One of my early transmissions relating to my concerns was limited access. Made a transmission for any resources not already on the scene, stage, and line of approach half-mile away, so that we could have an open flow of roadway if we were engaging in patient movement and any EMS activities. That additional leaking concern for a secondary explosion. Early transmission 7 Alpha 4 was all units make attentive to keep away from the building except for when necessary, for a possibility for a secondary explosion, as we didn't know early on what the leak source was and what the gas control was. Engine 728, which was the second due engine upon the assignment, had made water supply instructions to support Engine 713 pertaining to the on-site cistern. I assigned Engine 728 officer as one of the hazmat officers to take care of hazmat, meter the structure, secure the structure of all of its utilities. That side Charlie exposure was a 2-story building that was office structure. Engine 740 was assigned to search exposure Charlie and support operations there. One of the early additional requests by the rescue squad was additional ALS resource for patient care, as well as LZ for medevac. Engine 708 was assigned to the LZ. We didn't go over the area map wide enough, but Davis Airfield is right across the street. Got to go up 108 just a tad to turn, make access, but from the front of the structure, we could see the helicopter land on Davis Airfield, and then that operation. So Engine 708 was assigned to the LZ. Got something, Mark?
Yes, I have a question. Did you know that you were going to be the first arriving command officer, or?
No, I did not know. I knew from the distance at right before 8 o'clock in the morning, Battalion 5 coming across from 34 was going to be very, near in timing with myself.
So did that throw you off at all, or were you driving down the road thinking about, hey, what am I doing if I'm first, or didn't really think about it?
Absolutely wanted the Battalion 5 to manage the radio as the first due battalion chief and the operations there. As we highlight in the lesson learned document, as well as the slide deck in a minute or two, the early request for resources, sight unseen, or the request for resources without physically being on scene is a challenge that you're balancing, calling for additional resources. And I had the same thoughts that Chief Lancaster had about calling for tech rescue resources prior to arrival, based upon the police report. But clearly, once Captain Yingling and Squad 17 arrived on the scene, I was thinking the exact same point that Battalion 5 did. Go ahead and start tech rescue based upon an on-scene fire rescue resource. So was prepared to be first arriving and was thinking the same lines as any CCO coming to a scene like that.
Gotcha. And I guess I missed this, right? So it didn't come out as a tech rescue call.
No, absolutely not. So
I heard the house fire part in the with explosion.
Right. So one of the challenges I was trying to play that Alpha 4 audio was Alpha 2 dispatch shows it as rural house fire with entrapment.
Gotcha.
Alpha 4 audio was now reported to be a building fire with explosion and entrapment. Learning through this process, a building explosion gets a different response assignment. Includes hazmat resources, includes additional ALS and EMS resources. We didn't get that on this call, which is a playing catch-up that we played, later into the game. But for anybody who had a quick second to read the Purvis screen, both calls were on the screen. Building fire with entrapment and building fire with explosion. So for the units that weren't going on this call, they saw that sit-in pending, but it was the first Alpha 4 transmission that said this now was an explosion with entrapment circumstance.
Okay.
So that's the command structure. So the circumstances at hand, looking at that building structure, unit officer recognizes clearly that there's significant structural stability problem inside the building. Calls for tech rescue resources. He also realizes that this gentleman is within earshot, within sight, almost within touch of his crews. This was a high-risk operation to make entry into the structure and to make a quick rescue. Perfectly good risk-benefit circumstance. The decisions made by Rescue Squad 717 led to positive outcome for the occupant. We're balanced between the risk at hand. As I said, one of my first concerns from the chief officer perspective was, what do I see? Because I'm looking at side Delta, side Alpha. Don't see what 17 and 13 are seeing. That's where Chief Lancaster was sent forward to be the forward observer and get eyes on the structure and identify what he saw and what resources we would need. Looking at that assignment and command structure breakout, patient care. Assigned engine tanker 717 to EMS. That should have been identified as triage. I should have identified that unit as triage, and then the secondary assignment of engine 734 as staging should have been EMS group, because my intent was to the engine tanker, survey this scene, find all of the patients, i.e. how many patients do we have, and identify what the circumstances were. One of the original callbacks was 15 patients. When Chief Mann joined the car, let me roll back a couple seconds, radio assignment and radio talk groups. Fires dispatched on Alpha 4. The Water Supply Task Force, based upon IRP and policies, is dispatched on Alpha 5, secondary talk group. Upon the request for technical rescue resources from the rescue squad, ECC dispatches the technical rescue assignment, and while still responding, advises Battalion 5 that they have placed those resources on Alpha 8. We missed Alpha 6. So Chief Lancaster confirms that and says, go ahead and put all the tech rescue resources on Alpha 6 so they're in one incident block. So we have 4, 5, and 6. The first thing I asked Chief Mann to do when he joined me in the car was take Alpha 5. Manage Alpha 5, be facilitating, because what we had placed there was, I made a transmission moving all EMS resources to Alpha 5. No operator available at this time. And we already had the water supply resources assigned to and responding on Alpha 5. When Chief Mann joins the car, I ask him to take over Alpha 5 and communicate with EMS, because that's my next major component, because Squad 17 identifies that they have the patient out of the structure. I've asked Engine Tanker 17 to assess my patient count, and one of those early transmissions was 15 patients. At that point, we had about 5 or 6 EMS units. Ambulance 717 from the initial response. We had the ALS resource on the rapid intervention. The rescue squad had made a transmission asking for additional ALS resource based upon the entrapment that was ALS 708 and ambulance 40. But we're about 5 resources on the EMS side, and that's all we have, and we have a potentiality of 15 patients. Engine 734, as EMS staging, makes a correct request, adding additional EMS resources and a MAB to possibly deal with that MCI circumstance. So they're dealing with assessing that circumstance of all those patients. Looking through that, we end up with 3 patients total, 2 resulting in transport. Our original victim from inside the structure, extricated by Rescue Squad 17 with the help of 13 and 17's ALS provider, taken to the LZ, transported by MSP to MedStar. The gas company representative, he's up, around, and walking around the scene, giving us key information, telling us that there was somebody else in the structure, telling us that he had the gas off. We did verify that and confirm ourselves through the squad driver that they turned the gas off completely. It was not completely shut down. Ultimately, later on into the incident, we did transport the gas company representative to the hospital, Suburban, for evaluation. And then we had one refusal, somebody who stepped on material in the yard. But EMS was ongoing by far. Hazard mitigation, like I said, we were checking for the explosion, secondary leaks, what created that. Early on, we were identified that the gas was shut off in the yard by the rescue squad. It took quite a long time to deal with electrical management, dealing with and isolating the electricity feed. We're in an area that's supported by Potomac Edison Allegheny. The name keeps changing, but we're outside of Pepco's service area. That traditionally means you have a long lead time in getting a utility representative on site. Rupert has a solar field and a large solar infrastructure. Rupert also has on-site backup generators. The generators are on. So throughout the process, as Engine 728, as the hazmat group went from gas to electricity control, it took a long period of time, it took several hours before we were able to isolate the entire electricity going into the structure, because part of the solar was fed into that structure because of the IT and the importance of the all-nut house to Rupert's operation, as well as the backup power was partially fed into that structure. It took a private electrician who was familiar with the structure to get on site before we were successful in controlling the electricity. That played a key part to hazard mitigation because we had a smoldering fire producing smoke in the debris of the Side Charlie addition that was sat with by a fire watch. Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, so question came in. Was there any indication of the ignition source, or now after the fact, do you know what the ignition source was?
No information provided by any of the 2 folks on site involved about the ignition source, and nothing has developed pertaining to that.
And
Propane
I
being
may
heavier
have
than air, it definitely settled in that basement component and could have and was that triggering point.
And I'll remember, how many, did you say the size of the tank, or if there are multiple tanks there?
2 tanks underground, and I do not have recall of what the gallonage was of those 2 tanks.
Do you know if they were connected together?
Don't believe they were connected together.
Gotcha.
So again, so part of the complex multidiscipline dealing with the hazard mitigation of the utilities and isolating those throughout the structure. Once that electricity was able to be isolated, we still had that smoldering fire in the Charlie addition, more on the Delta side now. That was a fire watch was attended to, and it wasn't until the addition was ripped off the structure basically after dark that we were able to confirm that there was no active fire or smoldering fire in that addition. Again, I identified earlier that I should have called engine tanker 717 triage, and I should have identified paramedic engine 734 as the EMS group. Those words were what I intended. Wrong identifier provided. Providing the objectives, when I did that to the engine tanker, assess the scene, identify how many patients we have, and gather them together, but terminology was a challenge. Talking through that question that Chief Davis outlined, Montgomery dispatches the Water Supply Task Force preemptively based upon the calls. Excellent decision. The Rapid Intervention Dispatch preemptively based upon the additional calls. We're in the rural part of the county where you're going to be dealing with a long lead time to get additional resources on the scene. The rescue squad confirms one trap. County police were already on the scene, confirmed that on the police side. And the balance, the decision-making from the chief officer perspective or unit officer perspective of calling for those additional resources sight unseen. We've all had those incidences where we're dealing with a large column of smoke and you're thinking that this is more than a brush fire, more than an outside car fire, and is it really just two truck tires on fire? And that's a definite balance of looking at your injects, what you're feeding, and then calling for those additional resources. Travel distance is clearly going to make a difference as you consider that. Post-scene coordination. FEI was called to assist us with origin and cause circumstance. We had a building explosion. This is an industrial incident. It's not a construction site as we would normally deal with MOSH activities, but we had a coordination with MOSH to identify what was our circumstances. Additionally, we had the historic nature of the Allnut House and what could or could not be done. Permitting Services was called early on to assist in that. And that took a bit of time throughout the beginning of the rest of the morning, throughout midday, and Rupert had a contractor on site, and like I said, the side Charlie addition was ripped off by just after darkness and nightfall, and then almost completely gone. The house was completely gone in about 2 days. But that takes time and coordination as you deal with that post-scene activity. So as I started off with, a great amount of kudos to the company officers and firefighters who were on those first arriving units faced with a complex incident. The assistance from all of the responding chief officers as we addressed this circumstance and looked at what our challenges were. Tech rescue was not used, could have been a long and protracted stabilizing operation to engage with that and potentially rescue. Looking at that inside of that structure, how would we have gone about doing a hasty search into that structure to identify anybody who was unaccounted for or known to be trapped inside the structure? Approaching it in a VEIS type operation, doing searches over ladders or searches only from the exterior via the ladder with tethers or all kinds of magnitudes of approaches. So complex incident that was tackled one chunk at a time by the crews on scene.
We kind of ask this of our company officers when we do the boss talk, but I think it's appropriate for today's stuff. So have you ever run an incident like this before?
Not an incident like this, having been to Arliss Street 2016 or 17. Building fire with explosion, much different. Chief McDonald had that incident by far. Looking at the fact that the building was not structurally on fire and dealing with the IDH was a blessing. But indeed, having had similar parts to a building, a structure explosion, yes, but not one, like this.
Yeah, so we talk about it a lot, right? Everybody has a Rolodex file, right? And in your Rolodex can be, oh, I've been to that before, right? Whether you're a medic and you see the trouble breathing call and the COPDI, or you see a hazmat call or whatever, right? So I guess did you use anything here that came from Arliss? Or not so much?
I'm gonna actually use my experiences from across the street here.
Gotcha.
I got to the drop forward lane, building fire, airplane fatality first, and that was as complex with more challenges because the building was on fire, there was an airplane on fire, and there was 3 people trapped. So I took lessons learned from that fire, that incident, and the statement of how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time, break it up into manageable divisions and groups and assign resources to it and adjust to it. That's how we tackled drop forwards and that incident, and that's where I was going with this incident through that process. And luckily, extrication was completed quickly, and there was no fire circumstance, and the EMS part was dropped from 15 patients down to 3 very quickly.
Was there anything, looking back at it now, any piece of equipment or item or technology that you would have liked to have had at the command post that you didn't? Whether it be something we currently have or like, hey, something.
No, I don't think so. Chief Nelson was the duty chief. He arrived, he did his 360, he took pictures, brought them back with the pad, provided that. Like I said, Chief Lancaster having a tech rescue squad officer able to be forward intel, let that knowledge be done. So there was no technology thinking of, that would have benefited, Chief Mann or myself in the car.
Drone? Did you use a drone at all?
Not for the incident itself, but had this incident been like Arliss, absolutely, it would have been, fair to approach
Gotcha.
that.
And the last thing for me, unless anybody else there has a question. So the last thing for me, and this is kind of always one of our closing points are, so if you were to run this call again, would you do anything differently? And if so, you mind sharing some of that?
The difference would have been not hesitate in calling for the additional resources. Like I said, we make mistakes by calling for resources based upon that big column of smoke, and it's a trash tire. It's a trash fire that's one tire, and you learn from that. Knowing the distance and how remote we were in the county and how long it would take technical resources, 5-10 minutes could have made the difference had we needed shoring to get him out to enable to save him. So I would have not hesitated based upon the police report of calling for that resources. And we all, continuously harp about using your situational awareness, listening to that police to try to get additional feedback. It was a couple minutes difference between Squad 17 confirming 1 trapped and the police officer on the scene confirming 1 trapped. So we could have done that earlier.
Okay. Last call for any questions from the group, if you don't mind typing those in. There's a small delay. I'll give folks 30 seconds. You're good. Just go.
Thank you much, everybody, and I appreciate the time. Chief Davis, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Chief. So going to check back up here at 1400 hours. 1400 hours will be the similar thing. If you're finishing up now, make sure you sign off with your name and fire department ID. And those of you questioning my ALS capability, it's COPD. This is COPDI. I had to fix that, so sorry. 1400, going to talk to Deputy Chief King about the Twinbrook water rescues. See you then. Hey, good afternoon, and welcome back. This is our second episode today on the 3-hour block of time for 3 incidents in 3 hours. COPDI. Anyway, so as always, right, if you're a chief officer wishing to get COPDI credit, make sure you sign in now and with your ID number, and do sign out in the similar fashion at the end of this 1-hour episode. A couple things. If you're watching from a station with a group of folks, please enter that station number and the number of folks that are watching. I forgot to say that last time. If you have questions, enter them in the chat, and I will try to get them to the presenter in a timely fashion as best as possible. I do want to note, in our last hour, meaning the next episode, we're going to try this Zoom thing. So what I'm going to do during this hour, everybody who is signed in, I'm going to send you a Zoom invite via the chat. I will also send it out by email to a chief's email type thing, right? The battalion chief all, AC all, whatever. So look for that, and would like you, if you're going to participate in the third hour, to sign in with the Zoom. Presentation will be on YouTube, but we're going to use Zoom as a way of interacting with the presenter. So, all right, so that about does it for the admin stuff. So our second presentation today is about the water rescues that occurred on September 1st on Twinbrook Parkway. We heard from the company officers a few weeks ago. We heard from the swift water rescue folks. So today we're going to hear from the incident commander. And as with Chief Goldstein, right, we're interested in hearing about the command functions, decisions that were made in the command post, all those kind of things that play in terms of managing the complex incident, and this was a complex incident. So with us today, we have Deputy Chief Rob King from the Kensington Volunteer Fire Department. He was the incident commander, and I'm going to turn it over to Chief King.
Thank you very much, Chief Davis. All right. So as we said, we're going to talk today about the water rescues from the apartment buildings on September 1st in the morning. For those who don't remember, there was not really any weather planned for that evening. They were talking about the storms coming through the next day on Wednesday, later in the day, so there's no upstaffing in place in the early morning hours when the call came out. But as we kind of all know now, there was definitely things started happening after midnight, culminating with this water rescue plus the one at Congressional Towers. So we'll go through the call. First started as a routine water call. The comments on the CAD were of water in the apartment. Units were already out of place and dispatched for other assorted service calls or vehicles in the water, and so paramedic engine 718 was put on the call from quarters at 3:49 in the morning. I woke up with the pager going off for engine 705 getting dispatched somewhere around like Tuckerman and 270 for vehicle in the water. And I was like, well, I'm not driving that far. But I went down and I looked at the computer, looked at the MDC and took a look and saw this one pop up. And then I saw it change from the routine service call to the drowning one. Pulled up the comments and looked at it and saw that there were comments about a child floating in the water. So got all my stuff, got down, started going, and the ECC added Medic 723 to the call. They responded from quarters, and Paramedic Engine 723 was already on a routine call. They preempted themselves and added themselves to the call. And then, of course, I dispatched. And then additional comments kept coming in as there were more and more calls coming in and getting processed by ECC, who was, approaching overload given the calls for service going on throughout the county. And they implied a more serious incident than, just water in the apartment, right? Initially reading the comments, it kind of sounded like we had just water horizontally coming in the apartment. And later on we figured out, no, we're talking about, depth of water. But the call type remained unchanged as just the drowning one. So this is the area. Going to the top left there under the capital T, that heads towards Rockville, towards Station 3. Other side goes towards Station 21. And then, of course, we see Twinbrook in the bottom, headed down the bottom is towards Station 23. Initially, the calls came out for 13214, which is that top right building. And then more and more calls came in for it. This is what it looks like during the day. We can see that there is a 4-story apartments. There's a terrace down there, and in that terrace area in the bottom, there's it's about 8 or 10 feet below the grade of the parking lot here. The building closest to us on the left is 13212. The furthest one on the left is 13214. The one we see on the right-hand side is 208, and behind that is 210. This is the flow of the water that ended up causing all the problem. When Medic 723 got there, there was water rushing about a foot deep over the parking lot, down into that little swale area, and completely flooded it out. And then as you follow the blue line around to the arrow there at Twinbrook, there's a culvert that the water normally drains under, but it wasn't. This is what crews found when they initially got there. So the water level at this point has receded a little bit from the actual peak. At the peak, it was up about another foot. And that's looking at, I believe, 208, the Charlie side of 208. Here's a view of 212 and 214 across the way. I had no idea for most of the incident that playground structure was there. It was underwater for a good part of it. And of course, this is happening in the dark too. Here's another picture, showing the water level. And you can see if you look closely, the water levels come down probably about 4 or 5 bricks here from what the peak was. All right, a little bit more about the scene. It's an established neighborhood, about 150 residents in between those 4 buildings, the 4 address buildings. The parking lot was full of cars because it was 3:50 in the morning when the call came out. Residents were all lined up watching. There were residents, on the balcony of level 1, looking down onto the terrace level with all the water, screaming, pointing out where people were. It's actually 4-story garden apartments with 3 up and 1 down to the terrace when you come in from the parking lot level. So you go down a half flight, landing, turn around and go down another half flight, and that's where the terrace level apartments are at. And we found that all of the terrace level apartments between 13208, 10, 12, and 14 were flooded with water approaching 8 feet in depth. As I first arrived, I saw Medic 723's crew in the water making rescues, called to get a situational update report from Paramedic Engine 718, did a face-to-face with Captain Heflin, who gave me the brief on we had multiple people trapped in the apartments, active rescues underway, additional resources coming, and our concerns initially were to identify the total number of victims and where they were, figure out how to get them out with the resources we had. We called for more resources, but everybody was already spread out from additional calls for service that were already going on, so it took some time for them to get there. Later on in the incident, throughout the incident, concerns for water safety, or responder safety there, in terms of wearing their water rescue PPE, safety officers, communications problems, which I'll touch on a little bit later. Later on in the incident, decon for all of our personnel that went into the water, rehab for those same personnel, and then any EMS needs for victims, personnel, or the citizens who were living there but otherwise uninjured. We had about, as I said, 150 folks that needed to be sheltered after this. All 4 of those buildings were condemned, power and gas controlled to them. So we had to figure out how to house those folks and help them get back what they could salvage. And then also dewatering that basically big bathtub of just floodwaters to complete searches for the folks that were still outstanding, the residents that were still outstanding. So here's a picture of Swiftwater crews working with, I believe this is engine 718 at this point, it might be 723, working on one of the apartments where we had multiple people still trapped later into the incident. You can see all the debris in the water. You can see it's still pretty deep. And they're working to try to figure out how to get in under the sliding glass doors to get those folks out. On the far side of the picture, at the top of the picture, is a bank, and that goes up to Veers Mill Road. Tower 703, when they initially arrived, actually cut the fence there and pulled someone out of the water that was floating in the water and made that rescue, while Medic 723, Paramedic Engine 720, and Paramedic Engine 718 were in the water making rescues as well. So initial actions by the crews, I've touched on this already a little bit, but Medic 723, I pull up and they're in the water making rescues, swimming out once they're done, and then going back for more. Paramedic Engine 718 and 23 both deployed as well. They initially attempted access to the stairwells and couldn't, so they proceeded around the Delta side, which I have pictures of in a little bit, to enter the water and remove folks. And then Tower 3 made the pick from the water through breaching the fence. One of the problems we had was trying to figure out the layout of the building. And so I've marked this one up here. This is 208 and 210. Most of our victims were in 13210, T2, and T3. But we also had folks that we pulled out of 13208 in T2 and T3. And then the shaded in spot, we initially assumed, me and Battalion Chief First, as the other command officer on the call, initially assumed we had 4 terrace level apartments, but it turned out that that hashed area there was just storage. Trying to break it up, we heard Chief Goldstein in the last session talk about how to eat an elephant. Well, this one, who thinks that, 4 in the morning they're going to be pulling people out of floodwaters in apartment buildings, right? So individual suppression units, as they came on scene, were assigned to clear the primary and secondary of all 4 of the buildings. We had Tower 725 was dispatched for a vehicle in the water nearby at Veers Mill and Aspen Hill. And when they cleared that call, I added them to this one because they were the closest manpower to help out. So once 13, 212, and 214 were cleared, primaries and secondaries, reassigned them to 208 and 210 in order to assist with the rescues that were going on. One of the things that we did to try to get into, and I'll go backwards real quick, try to get into this T1 apartment in 208 and T4 in 210, was we actually cut all the floors. There were only little windows, one window on the outside walls there on the Bravo side for T1 and the Delta side for T4 was the only access other than through the main door, through the stairwell. And so we had the tower ladders working and cutting access holes in every room in all of these apartments from level 1 down to the terrace level to see if we could find anybody and if we needed to get them out that way. Swiftwater units, when they arrived, supported the units already engaged with making rescues from those 210, T2, T3, T4 areas. All right, so switching to the command structure. So I got there not too long after Medic 723 and Paramedic Engine 718 did. I did a face-to-face, as I said. The crews were working. I started breaking the incident up into divisions to try to keep it manageable and keep track of where everyone was. Battalion Chief First showed up not too long after me. And super on the ball. First thing she did was got out and walked around and got a much better situational awareness, acted as a forward observer, and came back with critical intel initially. I did not have a chance to get out of my car and walk around at all, so all I could see was the looking over the water. I had no idea the structure of the buildings. It took about a half hour from on-scene time until having a good understanding of the layout of the buildings. I was able to use Google Maps to figure out which building was which in terms of 208 through 214, but figuring out the numbering of the apartments, as we've all kind of heard and experienced in these garden apartments, sometimes you have apartment 41, sometimes it's Delta 4, or sometimes they go clockwise, sometimes they go counterclockwise, sometimes they don't have anything that seems to make sense in how they name the apartments itself. But having Battalion Chief First get out and figure that out was super helpful. As we went further and deeper into the incident, had liaison roles filled out with Chief Goldstein and Doc Chief Kerrigan to kind of coordinate with the other agencies we were going to need for the longer term effects. Chief Davis?
So there's a few questions. You can answer them now, or if you want to hold off, that's okay. I just want to get them out there. So you talked about using the MDC. So how often do you use the MDC? what's your level of MDC use? We talk about that with our company officers, like using technology. So let's hear from you. What is your frequency, and how do you use the MDC for you?
So kind of on a day-to-day basis, I just surf the MDC. You know, if something pops up, looks interesting, I'll take a look at the comments and see what it is. On incidents, as I come in, you know, I'm looking at the comments real quick, try to scroll through all the comments and see what's up there and what's changed, because, you know, and we've heard this time and time again, you know, when it's just you as one single command officer, you have to drive, listen to the radio, try to read MDC comments. You know, having that chief's aid would be super helpful. So one of the things I try to do before I do anything else is real quick scroll through and see what's changed while I'm pulling up to the scene. But then I use that map also, right? That locate on map button is helpful. Sometimes it seems like it zooms in too much. Sometimes it seems like it zooms out too much when it first pops up, you know, whatever that zoom scale happens to be. But it does help a little bit. And I kind of combine that with, like I said, Google Maps real quick to take a look and try to figure out where things are. Having the hydrants and things on the map is also helpful.
How did you access Google Maps?
I have just my cell phone
Gotcha.
on a little, at the A-pillar of my car, just sitting there. So real quick, you know, in between things, lean forward, looked at it real quick. So
you use that when you spoke a moment ago about using Google Maps. You used that. That's what you looked at to figure out.
Yeah, because I was able to, you know, the thing the MDC doesn't have. I use the MDC map also, but the thing the MDC map doesn't have is a satellite picture too. Gotcha. Right. And so I was using Google Maps for that satellite picture.
So there's like 3 questions here. I'm just going to read them right in a row, and you answer them when you want to. One is, did you ever think about pulling the first few responders out of the water? Next is, what was your risk assessment process and thoughts? And then, were you pretty overwhelmed, and how did you use the second chief? So however you want to incorporate that,
okay.
Just think about that.
So I guess I'll go 2, 1, and then 3.
Okay.
So risk assessment, you know, we had known people trapped, right? Viable, still on the call, or still on the phone in some cases with public safety, you know, or ECC, right? So it was a go situation, right? Crews were already engaged, making active rescues. They knew where the people were. They were going in for them. You know, from what I could see, folks had their appropriate PPE on. You know, when Captain Heflin came up to give me the face-to-face, he had his PFD on, had his mask, had a throw bag, right? I have previous experience with the Swiftwater team, so he was doing all the things they were supposed to be doing. Nobody was in turnout gear or anything. And so I felt comfortable, and one of the things I guess I haven't mentioned is that it was still water at that point. The water had stopped coming down and over into that basin. So at that point, you know, felt comfortable with the crews continuing to operate. The fact that, you know, didn't know how far out additional Swiftwater resources were because we didn't have upstaffing, so we didn't have dedicated crews. They were all scattered about throughout the county running, you know, vehicles in the water. So, you know, letting the guys and gals go in and you know, make the rescues was, you know, keeping with our life safety, incident stabilization, and property conservation, you know, doctrine there. And then how I used the second chief after Chief First finished doing the 360, she came back, hopped in my vehicle with me. I handed off my command board. I was using the Swiftwater board because it has, I feel, additional useful things like reminders for marking the water level to tell whether it's coming up or coming down, make sure people are in PPE within 25 feet of the water, and the other kind of safety checks that we need to be doing on all the water. So I gave her that, and then the 2 of us collaborated, you know, keeping track of the radio traffic, keeping track of what units were coming in, what we requested, working out where victims were, who we had assigned where, who we could reassign. So kind of the standard, you know, what do you do with the second chief? They become your brain to help you make sure you're not missing or forgetting things. Kind of going along with that, right? I did not initially, in fact, I don't think I ever assigned a safety officer on this one. Didn't have enough resources to do that. Relied on the Swiftwater units. When they arrived, you know, I made sure I told them though that, you know, they needed to make sure folks were operating safely, had their PPE on, you know, the proper water rescue gear. EMS 704 showed up, and throughout the incident, we called for some additional transport units as we had, you know, such a large crowd of folks outside. And I had a couple of the ambulances just circulating through the crowd to make sure that nobody needed any assistance throughout the duration. And then the last kind of wrap-ups were going to be decon and rehab. So called for an extra engine company to be able to wash down and our folks who had entered the floodwaters. And then we also used the transports to provide shelter for them, warming for them if they needed it. So a little bit on closeout. We had 12 folks, I think it was 12 folks rescued from their apartments. We had 3 transported. That included the pediatric patient. They were all from that 13208 Tango 3 apartment. They'd been in the water the longest. We had 1 fatality of a gentleman who, got out. His mom got out, but he went back for her because he could not, did not reunite with her in the parking lot. We ultimately found him as a fatality. I mentioned having Chief Goldstein and Doc Chief Kerrigan there to help with liaison. And so that was working through the Office of Emergency Management and Homeland Security to organize sheltering of the residents that were now displaced, Red Cross. We had DOT there to help us pump out as well. We had 1 injury, lost time injury with a first report of injury for all of the personnel who entered the floodwaters to make sure that they were able to get any care they needed as a side effect of going in.
Did you plan on arriving first?
I did not, but I wasn't sure who was on the call. Initially, it was just me as a command officer on there. So, I didn't not plan on arriving first, but, I didn't see anyone else there because, as I said, everybody was kind of everywhere already.
But you added yourself, right?
I did, yes.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and I was coming from the Aspen Hill area, so I came down like Randolph to Veers Mill and came across to Twinbrook.
So anything, any item, tool, technology, whatever, that you didn't have that you would have liked to have in the command post?
So I've kind of ragged on it before, talking about people trying to use FLIR in water environments, right? And how kind of unrealistic it is, because all you're going to get of a victim is maybe this much, maybe that much, right? Like a nose and up. And, they're going to be wet and cold, but, FLIR might have been nice, or a thermal imager might have been nice to try to look out at the water and see if there was anybody in there. Having 23s pre-planned or like pulling up 23s pre-planned for that building might have been nice. But otherwise, yeah, I don't know of anything in particular that would have been more useful in terms of technology in the command post.
So if I heard you right, you did whip out the Swiftwater command chart?
I did, yeah. I
Gotcha.
keep that, the MCI chart, and then the regular major incident command charts. But yeah, I pulled that one out as a conscious choice when I pulled up, knowing we had water rescues going.
Yeah, and so as a reminder for everybody, right, there are multiple charts out there, and at least all the battalion buggies are supposed to have them in there, a pad in there, right? So it's important. Again, it's one of those complex incidents like, hey, we don't go too often. Although I guess, right, you guys got Rock Creek, right,
Yeah.
and Beach Drive, where you, especially 5, is often down there with cars flooded. So have you ever been to this call before?
No. I don't know that anyone's ever been to this call before, right? Like, I've been to flooding calls, I've been to water rescue calls, I've been, to a vehicle in the water where they either walk out or we go out and get them. But, going down the road, I had no ability to picture in my head, what we were going to have when we got there. I'm picturing like a single apartment building maybe, and like a little bit of water, but to show up to, 12 apartments, with 8 feet of water, spread out between 4 buildings. Yeah, I had no idea what I was getting into. One of the other things I like to do is kind of, for mental offloading is I'll take a highlighter to my command charts and I'll highlight certain things to make sure that I don't miss them, first arriving. The command charts are pretty well laid out, but some of the things are not in the most obvious spot. So like, the assigning the safety officer, that gets, an orange stripe on mine, the water rescue ones, I swipe the safety things down in kind of the center bottom about like making sure folks have PPE marking the water level, to just call my eye to those things that need to happen, right off the bat.
Let's go back to radio communications. So run us through that. Did you use talk around at all? I didn't catch what channels you were operating on, because it would have come out on did it come out on Alpha 2 to Alpha 1?
It came out on Alpha 2 to Alpha 1, and then I think while units were en route, they switched it to 4, I think. So we switched over to Alpha 4, and we just operated on the single talk group throughout. I've later in the slides, and I'll talk about it a little more, we had trouble with the water and the radios, and missing communications between units because the radios were disabled by the water. But for the most part, yeah, everything was on 7 Alpha 4 going throughout the duration.
And did you use talk around or Zellophone or anything else?
Not for this one. I have in other incidents, but not on this one. Everybody was on 4. We had good radio signal strength there, and I believe that Chief First, when she arrived, turned on the VRS. But that's probably another thing. Now that I think about it, didn't announce was that VRS was on. But yeah, we had no one reported any trouble as long as their radio was working with either sending or receiving communications.
Okay.
So this is the next morning, or same morning, probably about 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock in the morning, after we'd pumped down the water. We're looking on the left-hand picture. That's that same play structure. Then the building there to our right is 13208, and that's the T1 and T2 apartments there. On the right-hand side, that's 13210, the T3, T2, and T3 and T4 apartments. And you can see the hard sleeves that were used by Company 23 to pump out in concert with DOT, pump out all that water, including in the apartment buildings there. That right-hand picture, they've actually got the hard sleeve going down in the living room to pump out that water because we still had that occupant unaccounted for, even into the morning. It ended up that they were out of state, but we were still going and looking for them into the next morning. All right, so lessons learned. Initial personnel recognized the life safety priority, and requested additional resources early. So as soon as Medic 723 got there, had people yelling about folks trapped in the water, saw the depth of the water, they radioed for the upgraded assignment and got Swiftwater going. And that was probably one of the most key things, was getting those resources started early. Because as I've said, multiple times now, they were scattered about throughout the county. They weren't coming from their regular spots. The roads were flooded, so normal paths of travel may have been obstructed. And probably one of the biggest things through the whole incident is that, despite the difficulties of trying to access the victims through these sliding doors or windows, and with reports, from the folks on the phone with ECC being relayed to us that, the water is coming up to the ceiling, and one of our victims is only 4'10". The crews went in, they didn't write the victims off. They went in and continued to, work hard to get those folks out. One of the comments I got from talking with the unit officers and, agree with was, plan a little bit before you act, right? Usually we have set response plan, right? Like we know first due truck's going to do this, second due truck's going to do that, what equipment each position's going to bring with them. But in this case, we ended up breaching the floors. So the truck drivers had to go back to their trucks. And as I said, Tower 703 was out on Veers Mill. So that's a long hike to go around everything to bring that equipment in to be able to start cutting cutting through the floors with the saws and such. PFDs, and by PFDs, extra PFDs for the victims, right? All of our personnel had theirs on, but finding extra PFDs off of other apparatus as it arrived or off the Swiftwater units to be victim PFDs, definitely needed to take those in with us. We were able, in most cases, to either get the victims out of the water without needing a PFD on them, like by putting them up onto the balcony above, or putting them into the boat with the Swiftwater folks. Situational awareness and intel were incredibly difficult to develop, right? It's dark, it's 4 in the morning. don't have a clear picture of everything because of partially like positioning, because of the cars that are there, the people that are watching things go on, right? The crowd standing in front of things, the size of the area of operations, right? Being 4 apartment buildings. One of the things that we didn't know until daylight and we pumped it out was there was a transformer in there. One of those green boxes that stands, probably 5 feet tall, was in the middle of that floodwater set. We had crews in the water operating right there where that was. We were able to locate the property manager probably about 20-ish minutes in, and he, by grabbing onto him and saying, don't go far from the command post, we were able to get vital information about the layout of the building, the number of residents, if any of the units were empty, anybody he knew was out of town, anybody he knew that had any mobility issues. Finding that property manager was probably the most key thing in the long term of completing our searches. Mentioned it already a little bit too, having Chief Goldstein and Chief Kerrigan on scene to handle those liaison officer activities allowed for Chief First and I to continue to handle the command aspect and make the rescues while they set up with all of the partner agencies for the long-term mitigation of the incident and making, looking out for the residents, in the short and long term with having housing and getting Red Cross and such started. All right, we talked a little bit about communications. One of the things, at one point, like I was calling a unit and couldn't get them. Calling a unit, couldn't get them. Did that multiple times, and so made a transmission that anybody who can hear me needs to find this unit on the fire ground for me, right? And what had happened was the crews took the radios into the water. They're supposed to be good for like 30 minutes at 2 meters, but their radios stopped working, and so we eventually set up to have somebody monitoring the radio up on land and relaying back and forth. But that definitely, since we are pretty much talking on the radio all the time with our incidents, that was a problem and a shift that we had to do. Was sometimes you're not going to be able to talk to people for a little while till they come back. Mentioned no formal safety officer assigned. We relied on the swiftwater units to handle that in addition to their normal rescue tasks. And then one of the other things, we've talked about this before, is as we roll into the colder part of the year now, the importance of bringing shoes and cold weather bag with extra clothes on, right? All of our personnel that went in the water had no dry clothes with them to change into. So luckily this was, the August, September time frame and not, December or January. But, not having that stuff, they had to make it back to the station, with wet clothes on to be able to do that. And then, the bringing the shoes, you're not supposed to go in the water with your turnout gear on. That includes your turnout boots, right? They don't swim real well hanging onto your feet like that. All right, so that ends my prepared slides, Chief, if you have any more questions or anything.
Let's see. So let's talk about interactions with the specialty team, right? So you got there before they did, right? How did that go? Meaning, I don't mean good or bad, but like, so how did the interaction with the specialty team, meaning the Swiftwater folks, go? Right, at the end of the day, the incident commander has the ultimate responsibility, right? But we rely on subject matter experts. So let's just talk about that transition of info, plan, whatever, how that worked out.
So when the Swiftwater team got there, we moved some apparatus around to let them get the boat up close to where it was, and they used the rapid deployable, the one without the motor mounted to it, because they were able to carry that down. But did a face-to-face with them and said, got crews operating. Here's the layout of the buildings in terms of the numbers. Here's the layout of the buildings in terms of the apartments in the buildings, and how many folks we had outstanding and where we thought they were. And I said, go for it, right? Just turn them loose, let them, relied on them with their subject matter expertise to be able to, pitch in at the right spots and do it. And then, called for an additional Swiftwater unit, gave the same kind of brief when they arrived. But for the most part, just gave them the goal to accomplish and let them, figure out the best way to do that. and then provide status. They provided status back, and we provided additional support as they needed it.
All right, let me check the chat here. A couple notes. Chief Stanton notes for everybody that, hey, the battalion iPads do have Google Maps on them also, and they're pulled up pretty fast as well. The Sonum phone can take a bit getting there, but the iPads seem to be okay. And Captain First talked about the locate on map on the NTT MDC takes you to the address point, but it doesn't always have to be the exact building placement. So that's for everybody out there using that. Give another few 30 seconds. Anybody else has any questions or comments on this? Stand by. Tad bit of a delay there on the YouTube. While we're waiting, I sent out some Zoom stuff, and of course it's my first time doing that, right? So I put down Pacific time. So disregard that one. I'm going to send out another one for that. Many thanks to Chief Grinder. Sharp as a tack, that guy. Caught that and emailed me on there. Out of curiosity, do you have Swiftwater gear in your car?
I don't.
Gotcha.
I don't. Yeah, I haven't been on the team in a couple of years now.
Yeah, but I mean, even just for yourself, right?
No, we're working to remedy that. We're going to get PFDs and
right.
the gear in there. But yeah, at the time of this call, no, did not have anything.
Gotcha. Okay, unless you got anything else, I think we're going to close out this episode. And anything else?
No,
nope.
Thank
All
you
right.
so much.
So thank you very much for sharing that. Right, it's always important, I think, to hear from the incident commanders of these events. So I'll try to fix the Zoom thing. The next session, I do need some interaction. So it means you got to wake up and pay attention. I'm going to try to do Zoom. I'll send it out via the chat, but also to the chief's emails, which I just sent out. So I'll fix that to Eastern Standard Time. I think that's what we're on, and get that worked out. If it becomes a train wreck, we'll just stop it and do what we're doing here. So that's it. See you back at 1500 hours. Again, Chief King, thank you very much. Hey, good afternoon and welcome to our third hour of today's COPDI. We're trying something a little different with the digital media folks. We're trying to work out some Zoom stuff and some YouTube Live stuff. We like YouTube Live because it can reach a huge audience. Zoom has some limitations on it, but we like the features of Zoom. So anyway, you got to play along, right? So we're using the YouTube Live as our means for recording who attended. So make sure that you sign in with your last name and fire department ID. And then sign out at the end at the same time. The other part of that is if you are watching as part of a station, then we would like to know what station and how many people are watching. So I'm taking the place of Battalion Chief Blinkhorn today. He was in the process of attending the funeral for the Montgomery County police officer. So he asked if somebody would fill in, and I'm filling in. I'm not doing his topic. He is putting together a topic dealing with lightning strikes and building fires, and I think it's going to be pretty interesting. So we'll save that for another time. So what I want to do today, some of you have done this before in previous episodes along with me, is, hey, we're just going to talk about, take a look at some pictures, right, and some video, and talk about some incidents from the incident commander perspective. Nothing fancy, right? I dug this out of the drawer last night, updated it some, and actually, after I started working on it, a couple big events happened nationally, and I thought that it would be good to talk about them from our perspective. So we're going to look at a bunch of photos. How many? I don't know, right? But we're going to look at a bunch of them, understand none of us were there. I may have been there on a few, but I'm not going to talk about it as if I were there, right? We don't know. The picture's a moment in time, right? We see that all the time. We see YouTube videos of buildings on fire. We watch them. We see the station officers watching them. We weren't there. We weren't making decisions, but it doesn't mean we can't look at those things and say, hey, how do they apply to us here in Montgomery County, right? What if I was the incident commander on that? So that's the game we're going to play today. Sometimes I call it, what do you see? What are you going to do? Other things for different company officers. I want you to think about it from the incident commander perspective, all right? So I put a few statements up on the board here if you guys want to zero in or narrow down on that some for the camera guys. We're going to look at some photos, maybe a video clip or two. I want you to take, when you first see the photo, right, I want you to think about what is it, right? So what is it? Well, you know, if it's the fire, what's on fire? What kind of building is it? Am I looking at a hospital? Am I looking at the dumpster? What am I looking at? How bad is it, right? So all of us incident commanders, right? You've been doing this for a while. You worked your way up through here. You worked your way up from a firefighter to a company officer to now a chief officer. You all have a sense for, hey, how bad is it? Even from the EMS world, right? So I joked about the paramedic ALS stuff last time and some things that I said that Mike Grinder happened to catch again, a top-notch guy there catching that EMS stuff for me. But, right, you all know when you walked into that room and you saw that critically ill patient, right, you know that this is bad, I got to take action right now. So from an incident commander perspective, same thing, right? When you see these photos, how bad is it? What's your level of comfort? Like, oh my God, I don't believe this, or hey, everything looks like it's going to be okay. I want you to think about what is your immediate concern. I'm not saying what are you going to do. What is your immediate concern, right? What pops into your head first? What are you going to do next? Whatever that might be, right? So what are you going to do next based upon what you see? I'll give you some intel, like who you are when you arrive. And then because we are in Montgomery County, right, we're pretty good about being command team focused. I want you to talk about what would you do with the second chief, right? What's your plan for them if you're establishing the command? So that's kind of how that works out. So the way this is going to work and you got to bear with me, right? So I'm going to be watching the chat, and I am going to be listening up on Zoom. So if you want to talk to me, talk on Zoom. You want to type to me on the chat. We'll see how this goes. So not yet, but in like 30 seconds, I'm going to pop up a photo. I want you to take a look at the photo and think about those questions I had up on the board. I want to talk about it just briefly. So while I was getting this prepared, this photo came across social media yesterday morning, and I thought it was really good because, hey, this could be anywhere in Montgomery County. So pop that photo up, go full screen if you don't mind with that. So anybody in social media, that was FDNY yesterday morning. I think that was Brooklyn. But that's on arrival, right? That's on arrival. Right, somebody right across the street took that picture. I'd like to run through those questions, right? So, Rob King, you got to turn your radio off, fire department radio off, or down or something. All right, who's in? Who's in? What is it? Somebody tell me what it is. Rob King, you got to turn your radio down. You're popping up. All right, so yeah, good. All right, so somebody, let's go down the list. What is it? Anybody can hop in. This is where you unmute, you participate.
High-rise building under construction.
Okay, how do you know that? And I'm not going to put anybody on the spot, right? But I'm going to ask some questions. So how do you know that?
You can see the scaffolding in the windows.
Okay, right. So it appears to be a high-rise or some, a taller building under construction, right? Maybe the first arriving company gave that report. Think about you're the incident commander. Are there companies there already? There are, right? You see some firefighting companies there. Lines are starting to be stretched, right? So you're not the first arriving person, right? So somebody is there operating already. Let's talk about how bad is it. I would like to hear somebody's thoughts about how bad is it.
I would say moderately, right? There's a potential for workers trapped above that. So the problem with the smoke inhalation, and I think my biggest concern would be to get an accurate account of how many people are trapped or potentially trapped above that.
Yeah, so hold on what you're going to do. So in the spectrum of no problem to holy cow, this is the worst I've ever seen, what's your level of badness on a scale of 0 to 10?
6.
Anybody else? Anybody else? Like how bad? What if this is downtown? This could be downtown Bethesda, right? How bad is this for us? Gibson, Captain Gibson? What if that's down?
So I would say a 6, right? And just because, I mean, it looks impressive, but the biggest concern is just that smoke. So about a 6.
Okay. If you followed this yesterday on social media, right, they got reports of like 8 or 9 workers trapped above that, right? But let's say you don't know that yet. What's your immediate concern?
So ensuring that companies have water supply, making sure we have a good assessment of the scene, getting a full 360, the full picture, just trying to get as much information as possible, and getting the status of, I guess, the people trapped. That would have been my top 3 things, I think.
All right. We got somebody typing in, says, hey, I'm concerned about how long it's been burning and the stability of the structure. Right, so that's clearly a valid point, right? So it appears to be poured concrete. In the process of that, don't know, I don't see a crane in there, right? It's one picture, we don't see the whole thing. So I go back to, hey, is there a fire in that building?
Yes.
No doubt, right? No doubt there's a fire in that building, and given the way it looks, right, it's not a stack of papers on fire, right? There is something burning of pretty serious consequence. You don't know if that's a forklift burning, if that's a piece of equipment, is that a fuel oil tank burning, what the heck is it burning? We don't know, but it's pretty significant, right? And it's creating a lot of problems there. What are you doing next? So you are the incident commander, you just arrived. They called, they're doing their thing, right? So this is downtown Bethesda. Crews just arrived. They're engaged, we'll say, you came from 20 as the battalion chief, or you came from BCC Rescue Squad, doesn't matter, right? You came from that general area, you pulled up downtown, you got 6 engine and truck and 7's engine going to work, right? What are you doing next? Any thoughts from anybody beside Captain Raphael Gibson, who's obviously trying to get promoted, but he's doing a good job of that?
I think, Mark, that I'd call for some additional help. I don't know what the exposures are. And then my next priority is I want to really know what's on fire and about the stability of the building, because that's really going to affect how we deploy.
Okay. How you going to go about doing that? Well, there's some bunch of choices to do that. How might Chief Bush go about doing that?
Well, I could ask the initial arriving companies to provide some more information, ask some pretty pointed questions. I think I've heard you do that a couple times. The other thing I could do if there's additional arriving chief officers is have them go do some reconnaissance, use the iPad, FaceTime, whatever.
Okay. Anybody else? So we're calling for some help. We call for help in bundles, right? What bundle are you calling for?
Yeah, I think I'd call for a second just based on my initial impressions.
Okay. Yep. Hang on. I got to check a chat out here. So I have one person reporting trouble viewing. I don't know if anybody else is, right? So YouTube Live, to me, the feed looks fine. So it could just be that one person. If you happen to be running it off of a cell phone to like a TV, like a Bluetooth, that generally causes a problem. So I don't know if that's how you're watching it, but anyway.
Hey, Chief, real quick, this is Rich Fleischer.
Yeah.
Are you watching it through the YouTube Live, not through Zoom?
Correct.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Sorry, I misunderstood that. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, that's okay. Gotcha. So remember, watch through YouTube Live, and we're communicating through Zoom, simply because of the access, some limitations on that. Jim Resnick, I see you. Either that or you dropped a cup of coffee or something. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are that I'm working on getting onto YouTube Live.
Gotcha. All right, no worries. No worries. We sent them instructions out like a few days ago. It's okay. All right, so you get the idea, right? Oh, so let's go back. So somebody else, what are you doing with the second chief? So you have some choices, right? Some choices are, hey, they come to the car. Hey, they go do something else. What are some folks' thought about what are you doing with that second chief? Second chief in downtown Bethesda could be who? Who could that be? My Bethesda folks.
It could be Battalion 1 or Battalion 3 or Battalion 4, depending on where everybody is. But I'd want them to go around to the other side to
one of the federal chiefs.
Yeah, right. So 750 could be in there, right? In fact, 750 could be first because Battalion 2 was somewhere else, and maybe there was nobody available with BCC, or it could be a BCC chief second in, right? Yeah, so folks, on Zoom's a little tricky. Just unmute yourself when you go to talk, right? Unmute when you go to talk. So back to Captain Kraft. Go back to what you were talking about doing with the second chief. Dale Browning, you got to mute yourself. How do I mute? I got him. Sorry, I cut him off.
All right, Chief.
Yep, there you go.
I would definitely send the 2nd Battalion Chief around to the rear to give a good perspective of what's going on, and also concrete building, VRSs could be a concern. So you definitely want that perspective of the rear of where the first chief is not.
Okay. And Dale, I didn't mean to cut you off, but that was your first warning, right? So you're going to have to work that out. Maybe the Russians are watching stuff in Damascus or something. I'm not sure. Anyway, so we get a lot of feedback, so only unmute yourself when you get ready to talk. That makes it easiest on all of us. All right, so you get some general discussion, right? Interestingly enough, they never went to a second alarm, and I never followed up on this, so I think it probably was not that great of a fire in terms of what was burning. It was impressive, but I think they controlled it pretty fast. They did have damage. I know they reported damaged about an 8x8 area of concrete that was unstable, cracked, and whatever. But so, I mean, you think about pulling up on that on Wisconsin Avenue, right? Of course, anywhere in Montgomery County, but I put it downtown, high-density population, packed in there together. That could easily happen. So, anybody have any other thoughts on this one before I move on to some video? Everybody good? All right, so again, the way we'll play, and trust me, this is my first time managing Zoom, so I'm as bad as other folks, if not worse. So again, if you're going to talk, just unmute yourself, and then you can talk. Chief Browning, did you want to add something? I know I put you on mute, but I can let you back in. All right. So probably many of you have seen this video, so I'll let the fellas put the switch back over to the slides now. All right, so this is the Manchester, New Hampshire, right, the Mayday. The apartment building on fire early in the morning, right? I thought there was good video of this. I'm going to let it roll. It's the citizens' video taking that. I think there's some interesting comments from the citizens. What I want to do is show the video. I want you to think about, hey, where in Montgomery County could this happen? Not just the Mayday, just volume of fire, right? And if you were to arrive as the incident commander when this video is being shot. So what you see is company, at least initial arriving company, getting ready to go to work. You see a lot of fire. The thing that's important here, this was not early in the morning. It's like 6:30 at night, right, on an evening. It wasn't 2:30 in the morning. Manchester is a city fire department. They have a fair amount of folks working. I've done some work with them. Good folks engaged. They do see a lot of fire duty in that area of that city in New Hampshire. So it's not like this is not stuff they don't go to, but, right, pretty significant event, a lot of chaos. And I'm going to let it run, and then we'll come back and talk about it. Maybe. I'm trying. There we go.
Oh my God, bro. Put your suits on fast. Oh, fuck. I don't know. Go and look at it. I think this is somebody was fucking. Come here. Live, Ma. There's going to be people live there. Look at that, bro. Look how fast it's burning.
Oh my fucking God, bro.
That fucking thing's old.
Is there fucking people in there?
I hope there's no one in there.
There's gotta be, dude.
I pray there's nobody in there. Come on. Hey, get all these kids over here. No, they're right there.
Listen to that shit. Back up, Jamie. Back up, guys.
Back up.
Debbie, back up, bro.
Yeah, that window's will
back up.
Blow.
That shit will blow.
Yeah, they're going in the back. It must have started right there, right? Look, there's somebody in there.
How do I stop? Okay. I want to stop it right there. So some thoughts, right? Let's start with what is it? Go back to our questions, right? What is it?
Residential apartment building.
Yep. Yeah, so in a New England term, how do those folks kind of describe this, right? Where do we have anything like this in Montgomery County?
Yeah, Piney Branch Road, the pretty similar. They're ourless.
Okay. While we don't have, the triple-decker type of stuff, right? In New England, you think about the triple-decker is really just a version of our garden apartment, right? But the issues are the same. They just might be designed a little bit differently here, right? So it's occupied multiple dwelling, right? Clearly, it's some kind of apartment building. How bad is it?
I don't think it's too bad yet. I think it's just maybe some exterior siding burning. Doesn't look to be too bad yet.
Okay. Anybody else? Always the interesting part, right, is 4 people can look at the same thing and think 4 different things. I remember myself and Chief DeHaven having a pretty heated argument about what the heck we're seeing at this restaurant's on fire, and we're seeing 2 different things. But any other thoughts? Anybody else's mind? Somebody else's mind? How bad is it?
My thought would be at least 1 unit off on the floor, and you're going to have some problems with roof extension here in about 5 seconds.
All right, anybody else?
I agree with him. I think it's just that 1 room off. It doesn't look like it's spread in the interior, but the soffits are definitely threatened.
Okay. All right. What's your immediate concern? Folks got some immediate, what is your number, like your first thing? You may have a couple concerns. Just first thing pops in your head. What's my immediate concern?
People trapped.
All right, people trapped, right? What are you going to do next? So this is you, incident commander. It looks like the first engine is there and you, right? Well, nobody else has pulled up yet. So what are you going to do?
Put water on that fire as fast as possible to ensure that we can hopefully keep it in check to protect the other residents still in the building.
Anybody else?
I'm going to have somebody start banging on the door because if this fire is on the exterior, the folks on the interior, since this is obviously a nighttime fire, I don't see people standing out in front of this joint. I may still have occupants inside who don't know the joint's on fire.
Okay. All right. Yeah, so I mean, right, so you think about our own IRP, right? We're all about people, and I think that's true for most any fire department. So clearly, hey, is this place on fire? Yep, no doubt, right? It's good chance that this is occupied, and I got to be worried about those people, right? Just real quick, what are you going to do with the second chief? He's not there yet, or she's not there yet, but what are your plans, you think, with that second chief? And then I'm going to let this run some more. Anybody got a plan for the second chief?
Sure, look aside, Charlie. Come back to the command post.
All right, Captain Kraft, I missed the first part of that.
Circle check, come back to the command post, hopefully have some pictures or have a good idea of what's going on around the side and the back, and
okay,
come back to command post and help out.
All right. All right, so I'm going to let this run through the end of it. It doesn't go too long.
They're going in the back room. What the fuck? Get out of there! Get out of there! Go! Oh, dude, for real? What are you
See
doing?
the guy at the front door? That's a citizen with a fire extinguisher.
Get out! Get out! Get out! Get out! Get out! Are you fucking me? I can't believe they're standing right there, whatever was right there.
Oh my fucking God, bro.
Oh my God, bro.
We did have a firefighter at that front door.
That shit's gonna. Oh.
Look at the inside of the fucking house.
Yo, it's everywhere. It's all the way through the roof now. There's somebody up there.
Oh my God.
On the third floor. Get
Third floor.
Oh my God. Oh my God. There's people up there. Get the fuck out.
Jump out!
Oh my God. There's people up there.
There's people up there, bro.
Oh my God. Come on, guys. What? Come on. Oh my God. I can't watch this shit. I can't. I'm shaking, dude. He's screaming for help, dude. I don't know why these people are laughing.
Dude, someone's gonna be in the water, bro. They need to be running the fucking hose.
Yeah, but they gotta get these people out.
I know, but someone's gonna be running the fucking hose.
Get the people out. They have to get that guy out of there. You have to get the fucking people out. Shut up. Get out.
Oh, they got a kid. Get the kid out of there. All right, so I'm just going to pop it right there, or stop it right there. So clearly they had somebody up top. We don't even see the back, right? There's a whole bunch of other stuff going on. I do have some audio now for this, and some of you may have heard the audio. It is pretty spectacular. Very chaotic, right, as we would expect. As I understand it, again, I wasn't there, but following some of that. So that first arriving engine was coming back from a medical local and got picked up on the box and ended up being first due, right? So think about, so from our company officer perspective, right, just think about those guys coming back on a medical local, good chance they don't have their gear on. They're coming right down the block and you got this on fire, right? So it's just from the go down, you're a little bit behind that 8-ball. But so a lot of stuff going on. I'm going to play the audio. There were a couple comments in the chat I thought were good to report back from Chief Bailey, right? When I asked, hey, what are you going to do, right? So Chief Bailey offered up, hey, flow water, you're going to have a good idea in a few seconds how big the problem is. And I think, so there was a lot of water, there was a lot of fire there, and I thought, if you watched, it didn't take long to make most of that exterior stuff go away. But then you did see that, okay, so fire is extended inside. Whether that fire started outside and extended in or vice versa, we don't know. But you were able to darken a lot of that outside, make it look better, but there clearly is stuff going on, and there's clearly people in there that cannot get out, probably because of smoke and heat-filled exit ways. Also, Chief Bailey offered up have the second chief follow the checklist, and I think that's important. We've had those checklists for a while, and I think they kind of pop up some like, hey, get in, follow the checklist. You listen to Chief King talk about the water rescues, right? They've They brought out the swift water command chart that's specifically designed for those kind of things. So I'm going to play the audio. Some of you may have heard this audio. It is compressed. I have no control of it. So it's compressed. It also is multiple channels. But we're just going to listen to it, and then I want to go back and look at the video again.
Engines 11, 10, 7. Engine 6 is the wreck. Trucks 1 and 7. Rescue on car 1, ALS 2 Delta response. 10 Dutton Street for the report of a building fire. Engines 11, 10, and 7. Engine 6 is the wreck. Trucks 1 on car 1, ALS 2 Delta response. 10 Dutton Street for the report of a building fire. Amherst Street to Chester Street. Operate on TAC 5.
Engine 11 responding. Manchester, Union. Truck 1 responding from the Elliott. Truck 1 fire alarm. Engine 11 on scene. 3-story wood frame. Heavy fire showing. Alpha Delta corner. Engine 11 will be stretching the line.
3-story wood frame. Heavy.
Car 1 to fire alarm. Start cover chief.
Receive phone.
And a K unit.
Engine 5 filling out the wreck. Delta response. 10 Dutton Street for a working fire. Engine 5 filling out the wreck. Delta response for a working fire. Amherst Street to Chester Street. Operate on TAC 5.
Engine 11 truck 1, you got a spot right in front, Alpha side.
Receive. We're coming down lake now.
Truck 7 to command. Answering. Come in from Chester. Set the exposure. Second new engine. We're going to need to reverse out. We need water. Repeat on truck 7. And you want to repeat that again, please? Car 1 on all Dutton Street command. Truck 7, you're going to have to come in from the Chester Street side.
Attention all companies. Working fire 10 Dutton Street. Attention all companies. Working fire 10 Dutton Street.
Engine 10 to fire alarm. We're going to be closing Maple at Amherst Street. We're going to need PD.
Engine 7 will lay in from Chester, from the plug on Chester.
Company's responding. We're in rescue mode. We have victim. Oh, window. Truck 1, I need a ladder to the BC corner.
Repaver coming up now.
Fire alarm. Command. Give me a second alarm.
Reporting second alarm.
Throw a ground ladder. We can't wait.
Jimmy, rescue 1. We're going to the 3rd floor, Alpha side.
Engines 2 and 9, truck 6, Delta response, filling out the second alarm. 10 Dutton Street for a working fire. Amherst Street to Chester Street, operate on TAC 5. Engines 2 and 9, truck 6, Delta response, filling out second alarm. 10 Dutton Street for working fire. Amherst Street to Chester Street, operate on TAC 5.
Engine 7, go ahead.
Engine 10, we're going to need this exposure protected on side D. We're working on what?
Command, Engine 5's approaching. What do you need?
Cap, you can't get into the back. We're going to need you up here for manpower.
Received, up. We'll meet you in the front.
Engine 11 to command. I got several victims on the 3rd floor. Trying to come up the Charlie side. We got crews on the Charlie side. Command Engine 11, we have ground ladders in operation.
Engine 10, Pete, Engine 10.
Command the fire alarm.
Command, go ahead.
We have a 2.5 story, approximate 50 by 40 building. We got heavy 40 building. We got heavy building. We got heavy fire.
Just paused it for a moment, right? So this has been the traffic up so far, a lot of stuff going on. So we've heard a couple things, right? They clearly got a bunch of victims. A lot of stuff's happening in the back. You just don't see what's going on in the back of this thing. And they don't have access to the back. So think about in Montgomery County, where do you not have access to the back of some of these multiple families? Everywhere, right? A lot of places have no access to the back. And as you get inside that beltway, you even have more and more of those. So I'm going to let it roll. Hopefully you're used to the pace now. Understand this is going to be on a couple different channels, and it is compressed. Engine 11 was the first arriving engine, right?
All 3 floors. We're in rescue mode.
3 floors in rescue mode.
Welcome in. Chief, we got the victim coming down the ladder now. He's coming out the window. We got 2 coming down the ground ladder. Engine 10, you ready for water? 30 seconds. Hold on, he ain't lying. Truck 7, get it up in the air. Engine 11, engine 10, stun that water when you're ready. Water coming. Command to the ALS. I'll need you at the front of the building for a face-to-face. And then 11 inside screws. I'm good going water. I thought the test after somebody.
Rest of command, we have firefighters coming now. D-side.
Receive ALS 4.
Engine 6 to Engine 6 crew. Head to C side of the building.
Engine 11 to command. We got more people on the third floor. I need a help up here. Receive. I got engine 10 through. Go ahead, your.
All right, tell me what you've heard. There was something that you may or may not have heard in there. Anybody hear that? Chief Kerrigan, you want to say something?
Firefighters coming out.
Yep, and before that.
I couldn't hear the audio very clear from transmission, but I'll have to say I agree with the young lady that's in the apartment that somebody needs to be manning that hose and flowing water. She was a little bit more tactful in her response, though.
Right. Anybody hear the Mayday? So there was a very brief Mayday, and then later on you hear about somebody coming out the Delta side, right? Firefighters coming out the Delta side. Pretty sure that's part of the captain, right? So on this event, right, that there's a captain right in the burn center, like 40% burns, part of that rescue effort, right? But they had, and that's when they got stuck on that ladder on the outside on the back. So anyway, a lot of stuff going on, right? I'm going to play just a little bit more, then go back to the video, ask some general questions. Also, the Zoom may time out, which means I got to add more time to it because I was too cheap to pay for it, and I only get 40 minutes for free. So I got to figure out how to do that. Just bear with me. If we drop off, we drop off, but I'll figure it out. So back to the audio.
Fire alarm, start a second bus.
Second bus en route.
Engine 11, engine 10, charge that line. Engine 11, C11A. We're on the second floor. There's no visual fire. Command engine 11. Engine 10, I need water. We're coming. Engine 10, charge that line. Engine 10, we need water. Aim out of the rear, aim out of the rear. First floor ridge, run the flash.
Third alarm.
We do 7, so no water. Engine 10, up on the pressure.
Yeah.
Engines 8 and 4, ALS 4, Delta response, filling out the third, Chester Street. Engines 8 and 4, ALS 4, Delta response, filling out the third alarm, 10 Dutton Street.
I feel it was an upper
for working
floor.
fire, Amherst Street to Chester Street, operating on
The guy that got burned was on a ladder trying to get out.
What do we got? Rescue A to 11A. ALS, who's my other ALS? ALS 1 is here. We need ALS.
Yeah, we're responding. Coverage at Station 6.
I have firefighters down at pediatric in my hands. I need you at the Dutton in Amherst, right by engine 10. These will be right there.
Relay to 11A. Captain Russo. We have to go towards the building. All companies from command evacuate.
All companies evacuate the building.
All right, I'm going to stop that there. Right, so chaotic scene, right? We would, I don't want to say we would expect anything different, right? That could happen to any of us. The compression of the radio even makes it worse, right? But there is a lot of stuff going on. I am sure in our time, right, in Montgomery County's time, we've encountered those multiple victims, whatever, things just all of a sudden, right? People are coming out. Companies out of showing up, maybe not in the planned order, whatever, right? Manchester goes through quite a bit of fires. You Google them on internet, right? So they're going to 2- or 3-story building fires, these residential occupied multiple dwellings, a fair amount, right? None of us were there, so I can't say anything about the decision making, but I thought the video and the audio is really good, especially for new folks. They're like, hey, dude, you're going to be in charge of this fire at not 2:30 in the morning, 6:30 at night, right? Who plans on this at 6:30 at night? Who plans on rolling up 6:30 at night with this? You would think that would be a 3 in the morning fire, right?
Put your suits on fast.
So let's just go back through this, watch it again with a little different perspective now that you've heard of the audio, and right. Think about how bad is it.
Come here. There's going to be people live there.
The Mark Davis perspective is going to say there is a lot of fire in an occupied multiple dwelling. And I'm thinking it's pretty bad. it may all go away really fast, and I was wrong, but I'd rather think that it's really bad and take that action as opposed to, it's only a room off, right?
I hope there's no one in there.
There's gotta be, dude.
I pray there's nobody in there. Come on.
So I don't have a way of pointing this out on the TV, but there's that bedroom, right, where you eventually saw where they rescued that kid at. So that's a third floor, right? So this is a two-story with a mansard roof, a whole third floor up there, pretty typical triple-decker type thing. Not a typical triple-decker, but a three-story wood frame occupied. May have. I have a helper who has not helped, but it's okay.
So you can see that behind the building, the backside when they pan over to the rear, there is a lot of smoke coming over the roof line that's coming from the same, a lower level. So there's obviously an opening back there as well.
Gotcha.
So that fire could be all across that first.
Yeah, and like I said, I just tracking down a little bit of the info that was out there on the internet, right? The captain that got burned on a ladder getting out, right? So in other words, like as I understand it, he was evacuating on a ground ladder on the back or the Delta side when that room flashed and he got caught in the fire. Very similar to those guys in Los Angeles at that gas explosion. And somebody kicked the ladder out, as third party
It'd
told
be
me.
interesting to see if he was on the ladder at the same level that the room flashed or on the ladder in the room below him flashed.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I would think more will come out about that. But so anyway, for all you watching, right, this is something you got to think about. What am I going to do if I am faced with this tonight, right? And you're faced quickly with a whole bunch of people. Think about the number of reports of somebody finding people rescued, right? Engine 11, engine 10, somebody got people in the back. All of a sudden quickly overwhelmed. And this is, right, this isn't a understaffed fire department. These guys show up, they show up pretty fast. This is a dense area. So not unlike us, in the southern part of Montgomery County, but you still have just a tremendous amount of work. How the heck you getting your arms around this? What are you doing with that second chief, right? So I'm gonna stop that there. Anybody want to hop in on any discussion points on that? I'm okay. Like I said, nobody here was on that call. Looks like my Zoom's still running. Anybody want to add any points of discussion there? My Zoom people still hear me? Bueller?
So not to beat a dead horse, but these guys seem like they knocked down the exterior fire and then they were trying to go inside and get it. It was pretty evident after they knocked down the interior, they still had a number of rooms on the interior that still had fire blowing out of them. I'm wondering if a better tactic might have been to try and reset this from the exterior before going inside. Hindsight.
Yeah.
And this is something that, as a command officer, I think we all struggle with. Everybody is in a hurry to go inside and to beat this fire out with their hands, and without necessarily paying attention to the cues of what's going on here. That this fire, that once we pushed it back inside, we have probably a common stairwell. So that now this fire's inside, we have all that heat. If it's going to be trapped, it's going to be rolling up into those upper floors. When we're going into those upper floors, we have to worry, are we setting ourselves up like in Baltimore County with Falkenham, where we're going to have people operating at the top of a heat sink?
Right. Anybody else? Trying to get a picture of that house back up. I can't.
So it's Barry. I was wondering if their unit was even equipped with a deck gun or wagon pipe that could have got water on there a little bit faster. Did the 1980s blitz attack possibly begin with that?
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I need my helper back. How do I get my helper back here? Sorry.
Well, I think it's interesting too. Most of our wagons now, we're rolling with stack tip nozzles on our deck guns, which are not necessarily going to be great for blitz attacks. They're great for penetration, but not necessarily for blitz. A fog tip is going to be much better for a blitz attack than a stack tip nozzle.
Any other thoughts? There, I just going to try to stop it right there. Basically that. Any other thoughts on what you're doing from the command? What are you doing with the second chief? I know we talked about this already, but anybody doing anything different now that we saw all this with the second chief? They don't get a second chief on their fire. Any thoughts? Peoples?
I think it's really important to have somebody on the other side of this building to see what's going on the other side. Especially, if they're putting ladders up or making rescues or making egress on side delta of this building. I mean, we don't really have a view of the Charlie or the Bravo sides of this building, so we have no idea what the flame spread is along the roof line.
Yeah, and as Chief Richards pointed out, right, get somebody to the back with the FaceTime. Here's where that FaceTime would be huge, especially if you took your phone and FaceTimed the iPad in the car, because the iPad's going to give you that big screen. I think that's pretty helpful back there. You're always torn like everybody, but I think nobody can get to the back. This is one of those, no fire trucks can get to the back at all. There's no alley, there's nothing, right? And so somebody, forward observer in the rear, that's probably pretty helpful. So unless anybody has anything, I'm going to want to start closing this out. Anybody have any final thoughts on this? Like I said, I was putting together Montgomery County stuff, but I came across these two that I found pretty interesting. And none of us were at either one of those fires. The interesting one, right, is that FDNY one. There was never an update of getting a second or third alarm to that, whereas you would have looked at that and said, oh, wow, that's a huge-ass fire, blah, blah, blah. And then you go here to the Manchester, where, of course, more help was needed. They were quickly overwhelmed with rescues, and I think that can happen. That can happen to us anywhere, right? It could be a single-family dwelling that has 10 people living in it, one of these 2.5 stories. So I'd be interested, or our team would be interested in using this format, meaning the combination of the two. I know it's a little tricky, but I'd like to hear what you had to say about the ability to real-time speak, right, and ask questions and try to figure out what equipment we need to make that happen. So if you don't mind dropping me an email on that, that would be great. We'll try to see what we can do to improve this. The whole pandemic thing has caused some difference or some change about how we approach. So in the end, I apologize. I didn't have my Company 19 coffee cup, but I did bring my Company 2 water bottle with me. And just a little shout out to those guys. I know they felt bad about that. But so this is it. This is probably one of the last COPDIs for the year. Chief Thomas may have something else out there. Remember, if you didn't see session 1 or 2, those will be available in the Fire Academy stuff, and you'll be able to do that. Other than that, unless anybody has any comments or wants to add anything, I'm going to say see you for today. Make sure you sign out with your fire service ID and your name. That's it. Thanks for playing along with us, and enjoy the rest of your day.